But first, we go to Skype, where Benjamin is connected to us. And by the way, you can connect with us on Skype at username LRN.FM. Benjamin in California, you're on Free Talk Live.
Hey, YouTube is pretty nice in suggesting things to watch.
Yeah.
And because of that, I ran across an interview between Judge Andrew Napolitano and Glenn Beck. I'm not a particular Glenn Beck fan, but I like Judge Andrew Napolitano, so I thought I'd watch it.
Judge Napolitano is the best.
He's awesome.
Yeah.
And so I watched that interview, and it led me to a couple more videos. And it became clear to me that Glenn Beck, he's been calling himself now a libertarian.
That's right.
And I remember when he said he was scared of that word. You people want to legalize drugs.
Right, and he's now against the war on drugs, apparently.
Is he?
From what I saw,
Okay.
it seemed
So this is a recent video?
This is recent. This is like within the last couple months, both these videos that I saw. And, he's changed apparently a lot of his positions. In the interview with Judge Andrew Napolitano, he apologized to Judge Andrew Napolitano because right after 9/11 and with the Patriot Act being proposed, Glenn Beck was for the Patriot Act. He said, it will expire. It has a time limit on it. It won't be abused. And he profusely apologized to Judge Andrew Napolitano for being completely wrong and for the judge being completely right.
Wow, that is something that's really unusual in the world of talk show hosts. I mean, they tell you in this business that you're never supposed to be wrong. You're never supposed to apologize. So for somebody to, especially with the stature of a Glenn Beck, who's the number 3 most listened to talk show in the U.S. I think he's tied with Michael Savage or something like that for number 3.
He was, but then Savage went off the air.
Yeah, but Savage is back. But anyway.
Yeah, but that doesn't mean he has the same ratings he did.
That's true.
He's got a different time slot.
He may not have as many stations. That's true. Well, anyway, last I saw, Glenn Beck was number 3. And for somebody to, with that status, to admit being wrong and to admit it publicly, that's pretty impressive.
Yeah, I thought that was interesting. I'm not a big Glenn Beck fan. Like I said, I came across the videos by chance because I like Judge Andrew Napolitano.
Mm-hmm. Well, this is the thing about Glenn Beck that I've always sort of liked about him is that he just feels a heck of a lot more real than the rest of these folks. Like he is able to say, I was wrong here, that kind of thing. I find him to be, great in that way.
Well, what came out from watching a few videos...
Glenn Beck's, by the way, I'm sorry, I don't mean to interrupt here. Glenn Beck is rated number 4, tied with Jerry Doyle and Mark Levin. Dave Ramsey has edged out Glenn Beck by 250,000 listeners.
Gotcha.
It's incredible.
Well, what came out from the few little videos I watched, and I'm not an expert, but was that Glenn Beck apparently has been completely bashed by a lot of libertarians of our stride, philosophical libertarians, and it made me start thinking about how we treat people who call themselves libertarians, we in the liberty community, because we recognize there's a spectrum. We recognize there's a sort of evolution that people go through. People joke about, what do you call, a minarchist? You call them in 6 months you call them an anarchist kind of thing. So we joke about these things, but then we bash people for not being completely pure in their thinking when they're at the early stages. And I think it turns people off.
Yeah, I think that it's, really, really not very helpful at all.
Okay, I get where you're coming from, but what do you suggest? I mean, if George Bush and Barack Obama all of a sudden tomorrow come out and claim they're libertarian, should we just accept that?
Well, we shouldn't accept that, but we should ask, we should do things like, well, what do you mean by that? What do you see libertarianism as? And then say, well, I see it like this. And kind of do those things.
Sure, that makes sense if you can have a conversation with that person, but you're not going to get to sit down with Glenn Beck and talk to him about those sorts of things.
And it's almost impossible for somebody that you haven't met before to claim to be a libertarian in front of you, especially if you don't meet him at like a convention or Liberty Forum or Porkfest or something, to not have a conversation about who's more libertarian, or where do you think the government should intervene? Because basically claiming to be a libertarian is claiming that the government doesn't need to solve problems in many areas. So some people will say the governments as we know them today don't need to solve problems in any areas because they can't solve problems. So it often becomes this winnowing contest to see who's thinks what and where.
Also, pardon me, I think it is somewhat a function of where the conversation is happening. Conversations that happen online are very often rude. And when I moved to New Hampshire, the three of us are participants in the Free State Project. My experience on first getting into big groups, actually the first experience I had was at PorkFest the year before I moved here, and it was incredibly welcoming. Mm-hmm. So, in fact, I think I heard on one of these other Keene-based radio shows that PorkFest is a big source of conversion from minarchism to anarchism.
Probably true.
And I think that speaks to what one of the great strengths of the Free State Project is. People are in physical proximity to each other. They can understand with each other and relate to each other in a very different and I think more real way when you're standing looking at somebody and working side by side with them.
No, it's always a lot harder to snipe at somebody if they're standing in the same room with you, as opposed to hiding behind the comforts of a keyboard.
That's all I got to say about that.
I agree.
I just know someone like my mother, for instance. She often talks about how she's completely different than in her political thinking than she was even 5 years ago. A lot of people. I think Glenn Beck's kind of at this constitutionalist phase that a lot of people go through.
Most of us have been there. I've been there.
Me too.
Me too.
A lot of libertarians like rules. So the idea that that there's a hard set of rules that we all have to follow appeals to a lot of us. So I think that's where Glenn Beck is. And so I think he's holding on to a few things and whatever. But I don't think it does us any good. And I'm not talking about Glenn Beck specifically because he's a big boy and I don't care if we hurt his feelings. But in a general sense, when we do deal with people, to think about, working with them on the things we agree on and hopefully getting them to agree with us on more things. Because I see a lot of people. Here's another really good example. Us libertarians, we often hear people, we mock the question, well, what about the roads, right? Because we hear it so often. But the reason we hear it so often is because that's a big concern for people, being able to travel around freely.
Yep.
And I think it's one we should address in a more serious, fashion and go, well, instead of going, oh, that's such a stupid question, actually addressing it in a very serious manner.
I totally agree. There are no stupid questions. I totally agree. There are no stupid questions. People are new to these ideas, and there are natural concerns that they're going to have.
And I think it's difficult for people to adopt a new idea. If I could explain it reasonably well, like, for instance, rather than the roads, let's think about trash collection for a second. We do private trash collection right here in Keene, New Hampshire. I mean, it can be a stunning statement for some people because there are private trash collection companies, but they're like, they don't really know even what to do about it, what to say about it.
Yeah, my experience with that was when I moved here, I was talking to my landlord, who's one of the city councilors, and just out in the street about something, and I think that I had a lot of trash that day, or maybe I was moving out of the place. I don't remember. And I told him that our dumpster was full, and I asked him when the trash was coming in. He said, "Oh, I'll just call them. They'll come pick it up now." I was like, "What? What do you mean?
You can't do that with the government."
There's one day of the week where you have to get your trash business taken care of.
Benjamin, stand by, because I agree with everything that you're saying, and that person to person makes total sense. But at the same time, does that mean we're supposed to sit back and be quiet when somebody like Bob Barr gets a libertarian nod for president? As we bring back Benjamin here from California. And I think he's bringing up a pretty important issue, and that is the Libertarian Purity issue, which can be a problem when somebody gets into the ideas of liberty and they're brand new and they're not really sure how it all, the principle of liberty applies, the idea that you should be free to live your life however you want, so long as you don't harm anyone else, that not aggressing against other human beings in order to accomplish the things that you think are important in life. It can be difficult in the beginning of hearing these ideas to really apply them to everything. What about the roads? What about courts? What about the police? I mean, these are questions that people legitimately have, and they need good answers to down the line, especially as they make the transition from libertarian light to real libertarian to voluntarist, for instance. And obviously we want people to go down that road. We want them to be more interested in these ideas and to expand their vision for what the future could be like. But if you turn somebody off in the beginning because you consider them not libertarian enough, that could be a problem. And that's basically what you're advocating here tonight, right, Benjamin?
Right. I think it does the libertarian movement, the liberty movement, no good to reject people for not having purity because they want the government to shrink by 80%, wherever at the stage that they're at. You know what? I'd be great. Let's work to 80% and then we'll fight with them. Why fight with them now? We're not even, we're not even close to shrinking government by 80 or 90%. Why fight with them now? Why not just work with them now, and then maybe they'll see how the solutions we have for these problems really do work and work so much better that they go, you know what, we can. I was a stickler on roads, but you know what? Wow, these voluntary interactions really work for so many situations. Why not the roads?
And I think that's the problem, though, is the term fight. If you're fighting with someone, then they have to fight back. I mean, that's just kind of human nature. When you yell or scream or deride or make someone look stupid, if you do any of these things, you've created an atmosphere in which one generally is going to react in a negative fashion. So if you can answer people's questions and consider that even when they make declaratory statements, they're still asking questions. None of us know the answers, including those of us who understand the ideas of liberty. We don't know the answers. We just advocate for voluntary interactions. Look, is there anything wrong with voluntary interactions? Is the marketplace the best place for innovations in this area? Is that what we want? Well, is it possible that some other organization could create the roads or do whatever? I mean, we don't know. In the absence of science in this area, there is no control group. So shouldn't I be able to opt out of whatever your little program is? All I'm asking here is, can I opt out of your grand idea, be it roads or schools or dropping bombs on people around the world?
Yeah, I mean, I agree completely with what Benjamin is saying here, especially when it comes to person-to-person interactions of friends, coworkers, family members, people that we have the opportunity, their lives that we have the opportunity to touch as we interact with them. But I also have concerns for the issue here, and that is the idea of libertarianism, which I think has largely been lost due to people like Glenn Beck and Neil Bortz and these other, even Bill Maher, for instance, on the more left side of things, claiming to be libertarians. Well, they're not. If you use the strict definition of libertarian, which is someone who doesn't advocate the initiation of force to achieve political or social goals, then they're not truly libertarian. They may be libertarian on some issues, and that's great. But I think there's a problem.
That's the biggest cop-out, though, when somebody says they're libertarian on some issues. Look, I'm libertarian on the kind of ice cream you can eat. I mean, it's you're either, like I get where you're coming from when one says using a strict definition. You basically have to say, look, you're not libertarian on this issue or that issue. You have to point out to them where they've got it wrong.
But so, like, I'm in total support of where Benjamin's coming from, but at the same time, I'm not going to keep my mouth shut when somebody like Bob Barr, who is not a libertarian, gets the Libertarian Party's nod for presidential candidate, which he did in 2008. I was a little less disappointed with Gary Johnson getting the similar nod in 2012. But, I mean, I want to call these people out because to allow them to just go off and talk about whatever it is that they believe, which is not libertarianism, and call that libertarian, I got a problem with that. So how do you reconcile those two things, Benjamin?
Well, I think one of the problems is that the term libertarian has become this very wide spectrum term that people use. And so it might be good to delineate, philosophical libertarianism from party libertarianism, from those kind of things, the same way we delineate minarchism from anarchism, from voluntarism, and all those kind of terms. And I think the problem really comes down to just, like you were saying, definitions. People use the term libertarian when they might just mean something else, whether it's a conservative Republican or a liberal Democrat or whatever it is. I think that's where it comes down to, and people just really want to fight, or not even fight, but get worked up over these definitions.
Yeah, and I think that you specifically are an interesting case study on this issue, because a couple of weeks ago, Chase from the Blue Ridge Liberty Project called, and we had a discussion about this sort of thing, and I learned most of everything I know about the Blue Ridge Liberty Project from that phone conversation. Okay. And that seems to be like a pretty doctrinal group. If you aren't on board with their specific ideals and values, they're going to let you know. And
yeah, you're not allowed to be a part of the group.
Right. Yeah, you're not allowed.
If you are a Christian, basically,
you're not allowed to be a member.
Or a Muslim, you can't be a participant in their organization.
They don't want you out there espousing their values if you don't share them.
And I think that's a huge example of a group of libertarians that are turning people away who otherwise would be interested in what they're doing.
Yeah, and I mention you because you're very tolerant, but on the flip side, you're the first one leading the charge when a libertarian presidential candidate doesn't live up to libertarianism.
Indeed. Benjamin, thanks for your call and bringing that up tonight. I do appreciate hearing from you because I think it is